I said, no, I need it. I really need it tonight. So he said, but I'm exhausted. I said, well, what would give you some spirit? He said, well,
at the height of his fame, Mel Brooks had it all. Blockbuster films, armfuls of awards, and a name etched in Hollywood history. He was the man who could make the world laugh with a single line. Yet behind the curtain of success was a journey far messier and far more daring than anyone imagined. He fought battles that nearly destroyed his career, clashed with friends in studios, and faced controversies that would have silenced a lesser man. Now at 99, he lives a life few truly know. But how did Mel Brooks get here, and what did it cost him along the way? The rise of a comedy legend. Today, Mel Brooks is 99 years old, one of the most celebrated names in comedy, and still sharp enough to get a laugh in any room. He's an EGOT winner, one of the very few entertainers to have won an Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, and Tony. His name is attached to some of the funniest films ever made. But for all the success and the acclaim, his path to the top wasn't easy. It began in one of the toughest environments you could imagine for a future Hollywood legend. Mel Brooks was born Melvin Kaminsky on June 28, 1926, in Brooklyn, New York. But unlike most children, his arrival wasn't in a hospital. Instead, it happened right on the kitchen table of his family's small tenement apartment. His mother, Kate, had come to the United States from Ukraine in search of a better life. But those early years were marked by hardship. To make matters worse, when Mel was just 2 years old, his father passed away from kidney tuberculosis. This loss left Kate to raise 4 boys alone during the Great Depression. Money was always tight. The family's apartment was crowded, and their meals were simple. On top of that, Mel was small for his age, often sick, and became an easy target for neighborhood bullies. But instead of withdrawing, he learned to defend himself with quick humor. If he could make people laugh, they wouldn't pick on him. And even at that young age, he understood the power in that. When he was 9 years old, Mel's life took a turn in an unexpected way. He was taken by his uncle to see the Broadway show Anything Goes. The music, the dancing, and the energy were unlike anything he had experienced before. That night, he decided that he wanted to be in show business. It wasn't just a dream. In his mind, it was a decision. Speaking about the experience in an interview, he said, "That show changed me and changed my life, and my hands stung from screaming and applauding so much after it was over. And I remember going back in Uncle Joe's cab, and I remember saying as he was driving me back home to Williamsburg, 'Uncle Joe, I want to be part of that show. I want to be in show business. I'm not going to enter the garment center. I'm not going to be pushing a rack of clothing to the post office. I'm going to write songs. I'm going to sing songs. I'm going to go into show business.' And I knew it, and I never deviated." At 14, he got his first real job in entertainment. He was hired as a poolside entertainer, also known as a tumbler, at a hotel in the Catskills. His job was to keep the guests entertained throughout the day with jokes, stunts, and banter. It was an important early lesson in reading an audience, but it was also risky work for someone so committed to getting a laugh. In one bit, Mel filled a suitcase with rocks, pretending it was luggage, and then fell into the pool. The stunt worked, and people laughed, but Mel almost didn't make it back to the surface and had to be pulled out. His struggles didn't end there because World War II interrupted his early career plans. In 1944, at just 18 years old, Mel was drafted into the United States Army. He served as a combat engineer, doing dangerous work like clearing landmines and building bridges under fire. Even in those conditions, he found ways to bring humor to the situation. He famously set up loudspeakers to blast Jewish music toward German troops as a form of psychological warfare, part defiance and part morale boost. After the war, Mel returned to New York and picked up where he left off in entertainment. He worked at Catskills resorts again, now with more confidence and sharper comedic instincts. He performed sketches, told stories, and learned to improvise in ways that kept audiences hooked no matter the setting. Those years became his training ground for timing, delivery, and creativity. But the real turning point came in the early 1950s when Mel joined the writing team for Sid Caesar's Your Show of Shows. This was the golden age of live television, and the writer's room was filled with future legends like Carl Reiner, Neil Simon, Woody Allen, and Larry Gelbart. Being in that environment forced Mel to constantly bring his best ideas forward. He quickly became known for his ability to take a simple premise and twist it into something unpredictable and hilarious. During his time on the show, Mel formed a close creative partnership with Carl Reiner. Out of their friendship came The 2,000-Year-Old Man, a sketch in which Carl would interview Mel, who played a man claiming to be 2,000 years old. The bit started as something they did to make each other laugh, but when they shared it with others, it got such a strong reaction that they recorded it. The album became a cult hit, showcasing Mel's quick wit and improvisational skill. By the mid-1960s, Mel was ready to move into filmmaking. His first feature, The Producers, was unlike anything audiences had seen before. The plot followed two men trying to profit from producing a deliberately terrible Broadway show that happened to be called Springtime for Hitler. It was a bold move for a debut, but it paid off. Mel won the Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay, instantly establishing himself as a filmmaker willing to take risks. But the success of The Producers was just the beginning. Over the next 2 decades, Mel released a string of hit films that became comedy classics. These films weren't just popular, they pushed boundaries. Mel Brooks had a way of mixing sharp social commentary with broad slapstick, making movies that appealed to both casual audiences and those looking for something more subversive. His style was fearless. He wasn't afraid to touch controversial topics, as long as the end result was smart, funny, and made people think while they laughed. By the time he had built his reputation as a master of comedy, Mel had already lived through poverty, loss, war, and the constant challenge of proving himself in one of the most competitive industries in the world. Every step along the way, he turned setbacks into material and obstacles into motivation. And while the public saw a man who could make millions laugh, his personal journey had its own share of struggles and challenges that tested his resilience in ways no one in the audience could see. The struggles behind the laughter. For all of Mel Brooks's success and his reputation as one of the funniest men alive, the road through his career was far from smooth. His public image was that of a confident, unstoppable comedy genius, but behind the scenes he faced moments of financial instability, creative disappointments, and personal heartbreak that could have easily ended his career if he hadn't kept pushing forward. One of the most surprising facts about Mel's life is that even after winning an Academy Award for The Producers in 1967, he was reportedly still living with serious money problems. The Oscar gave him prestige, but it didn't bring in the kind of income most people imagine. In fact, it wasn't until the massive success of Blazing Saddles in 1974 that he finally found real financial stability. Those years in between were a constant balancing act that involved trying to build a career in film while making sure there was enough money to keep going. In 1970, Mel directed The 12 Chairs, an adaptation of a satirical Russian novel. Critics praised the film for its wit and style, but audiences didn't turn out in large numbers. The box office results were so disappointing that Mel seriously considered giving up directing and going back to television writing just so he could pay the bills. It was a sobering moment for someone who had just a few years earlier been celebrated as Hollywood's bold new comedic voice. This wouldn't be the last time Mel had to deal with commercial setbacks. Throughout his career, his films often divided audiences. Some, like Young Frankenstein and Spaceballs, went on to become beloved classics. Others, like Life Stinks, failed to find much of an audience during their theatrical runs. Mel always stood by these projects, insisting they had artistic merit, but the poor box office numbers were still a blow. For someone as passionate about his work as Mel, each flop felt personal. Alongside the financial uncertainty, Mel also dealt with anxiety during his early years in television, especially on Sid Caesar's Your Show of Shows. Working in the high-pressure environment of live TV with tight deadlines and big expectations often left him feeling overwhelmed. The writer's room was full of strong personalities, and even with his talent, Mel sometimes doubted himself. Speaking about the struggle in an interview, he said, "I started to get nervous, and I thought I wasn't holding my end up because Lucille and Mel were working hard to come up with enough material, and I felt I was falling behind. I couldn't manufacture enough or come up with enough comedy. So I began getting very anxious, acutely depressed and nervous. And I remember saying to Mel Tolkien, 'I'm vomiting between parked cars. I can't do this. I can't sleep. It's impossible.' The stress was constant, But unlike many entertainers of his generation, he never turned to alcohol or illicit substances as an escape. Mel has never publicly struggled with substance abuse, a fact that set him apart in an industry where self-destructive habits were common. Instead, he relied on discipline, humor, and the support of close friends to navigate the pressure. One of the most difficult personal losses of Mel's life came in 2020, when his lifelong friend and collaborator Carl Reiner passed away. The two had met in the early days of television and built a creative partnership that lasted decades, but their bond went far beyond work. They were as close as family, speaking daily and often spending evenings together. Carl's death left a hole in Mel's life that he never tried to hide. For an entire year afterward, Mel continued going to Carl's house for dinner, sitting in the same spot they had shared so many meals. It was his way of keeping that connection alive for just a little longer. Even with all the challenges, Mel never let setbacks define him. Financial struggles didn't make him quit. Critical disappointments didn't stop him from taking risks. And personal loss didn't take away his humor, even if it made him carry it with a little more weight. But while his career and friendships shaped much of his life, his personal story was also defined by love and the relationships that carried him through both the highs and lows. A life shaped by love and loss. For all the noise, wit, and quick-fire energy that Mel Brooks brings to his work, his love life tells a softer, steadier story. His journey in love began in the early 1950s, long before he was the celebrated comedy icon the world knows today. His first marriage was to Florence Baum, a talented Broadway actress who had already carved out her own place on the stage. The two married in 1953, a time when Brooks was still finding his footing in entertainment. Together, they had 3 children, and for a while, life seemed set on a traditional path of steady work, a young family, and a shared commitment to each other's dreams. But as Brooks's career demands grew, so did the pressures that come with balancing ambition and home life. The marriage ended in 1962, a quiet conclusion that marked the end of one chapter and left Brooks navigating life as both a working entertainer and a father. Then, in 1961, something unexpected happened. While on a television show set, Brooks crossed paths with a woman who would change his life forever. Her name was Anne Bancroft, and at the time, she was already an established actress, admired for her commanding presence both on and off the screen. Their meeting wasn't the typical whirlwind Hollywood romance. Instead, it was a slow, steady build. Brooks was captivated by her intelligence and warmth, and Bancroft, in turn, saw a charm and sharp wit in him that was impossible to ignore. When they began dating, Brooks wasn't yet the financial success he would later become. There were moments when his resources couldn't keep pace with his desire to impress her. In one telling instance, during an early date, Bancroft subtly helped cover the bill without making him feel lesser for it. That kind of understanding and grace defined their relationship from the start. They married in 1964, forming a partnership that would last more than 4 decades. Their marriage wasn't just built on romance. It was a collaboration in the truest sense. They worked together on several projects, with Bancroft appearing in Brooks' films and lending her support in ways that often went unseen by the public. Brooks, in turn, celebrated her achievements and took immense pride in her career. Their shared respect for each other's artistry meant there was never a question of one overshadowing the other. Instead, they seemed to elevate each other. In 1972, they welcomed their only child together, Max. While Brooks had already been a father, the arrival of Max during such a pivotal point in his career brought a renewed sense of family into his life. He balanced film productions and writing with fatherhood, often structuring his schedule to make time for his family, even in the middle of the chaos of Hollywood. Their home life was warm and filled with laughter, but also grounded. They avoided the excesses of celebrity life, preferring quiet dinners and shared routines over constant public appearances. But even the strongest partnerships faced challenges, and theirs was tested in the most heartbreaking way. In 2005, Anne Bancroft died from uterine cancer. For Brooks, it was a loss that left an emptiness impossible to fill. They had spent 41 years together, in which they had built not just a marriage but an entire shared world. Without her, Brooks found himself navigating familiar spaces that suddenly felt foreign. In the years after her passing, Brooks has spoken candidly about how difficult it has been to live without her. He has never remarried, and by all accounts, he has never tried to replace what they had. In his words, "Once you are married to Anne Bancroft, others don't seem to be appealing. Even now, memories of their time together remain a constant presence in his life. The routines they built together linger, meals they used to share, places they loved to visit, and jokes that only the two of them understood." Anne Bancroft's death didn't just mark the end of a marriage, it marked the loss of a creative partner and a best friend. Brooks has often reflected on how much she influenced not only his personal happiness but also his professional work. Her encouragement during his early film projects gave him the confidence to take creative risks, and her belief in his comedic instincts was unshakable, even when critics or studios doubted him. Losing someone so central to his life inevitably shaped the years that followed. Brooks threw himself into work at times, using creativity as both a distraction and a way to honor her memory. At other moments, he stepped back, allowing himself space to grieve in private. Despite the sadness, Brooks remains deeply grateful for the time they had. He often frames their marriage as a gift, something rare and irreplaceable. And while the pain of loss never truly fades, the love they shared continues to be a source of comfort. For a man who has spent his career making millions laugh, his greatest joy seems to have come not from the applause of an audience, but from the shared laughter across a dinner table with the woman he loved. But aside from his beautiful love story, Mel Brooks was known for some controversial moments that deeply impacted his career. Controversies and feuds. Mel Brooks has always been the kind of comedian who doesn't just tiptoe along the line of what's acceptable. He barrels through it at full speed, grinning the whole way. And for much of his career, that fearless approach made him a hero to audiences who crave something outrageous and unpredictable. But it also made him a lightning rod for criticism, feuds, and legal trouble. The same material that won him fans for being daring and original also earned him plenty of enemies along the way. One of the most defining aspects of Brooks's humor is his willingness to poke fun at subjects that most people wouldn't dare touch. His 1974 Western spoof, Blazing Saddles, wasn't just funny. It was loaded with racial slurs, political jabs, and scenes that would make even the boldest executives sweat. Brooks has often explained that the satire was aimed at racism itself, exposing prejudice by making it ridiculous. But in the mid-70s, many critics, and even some in the film industry, weren't ready to embrace that kind of comedy. The backlash was loud, with some accusing him of crossing a moral line. Yet the movie became a cultural milestone, and Brooks never backed down from his belief that sometimes the best way to dismantle hatred is to laugh at it until it has no power. There's also The Producers, his 1967 film that was so bold in its parody of Hitler and Nazi Germany, it was almost never made. The premise alone, a pair of schemers putting on a musical called Springtime for Hitler, was enough to send studios running. Brooks spent months facing rejection after rejection, with most executives insisting the public would never accept a comedy about the Holocaust and the Third Reich. Even after the film was completed, the outrage continued. Some rabbis and Jewish organizations accused him of making light of a tragedy that should never be joked about. Brooks maintained that his intent was the opposite, to strip Hitler of any dignity and make him look absurd. But the criticism left a mark, and for a time The Producers seemed destined to be remembered more for its controversy than its brilliance. Brooks's clashes weren't limited to the critics, though. Behind the scenes, especially early in his career, he developed a reputation for being, as some colleagues described, intensely hands-on, which was a polite way of saying he could be controlling. In television writers' rooms and on film sets, Brooks was known to push for his vision with relentless energy, sometimes overruling other voices or demanding last-minute changes. For a director, that kind of focus can be a strength, but in Hollywood it can also lead to friction. And for Brooks, it sometimes did. One of his most public legal tangles came from Blazing Saddles itself. Actress Hedy Lamarr, a Hollywood icon of the 1930s and 40s, discovered that Brooks had named a character Hedley Lamarr in the film. The joke was intentional, of course, but Lamarr didn't see the humor. She reportedly filed a $10 million lawsuit against Brooks and Warner Brothers, claiming the use of her name and likeness was unauthorized and damaging. Brooks would later poke fun at the situation in interviews, But at the time, the case was serious enough to make headlines. Even his collaborations with close friends weren't immune to tension. His long partnership with Gene Wilder produced some of his most beloved work, including Young Frankenstein. But decades later, when Brooks adapted the classic film into a Broadway musical, not everything went smoothly. Reports surfaced of creative disagreements over the direction of the stage version, with Wilder unhappy about certain changes and Brooks unwilling to compromise on his vision. The friction didn't exactly erupt into a public shouting match, but it was enough to strain one of comedy's most celebrated creative relationships. What's interesting is that none of these controversies ever seemed to truly slow Brooks down. If anything, they became part of his legend and were proof that he was willing to risk offense in order to get a laugh. The same qualities that made him polarizing, like his stubbornness, his unapologetic style, and his insistence on doing things his way, were the very traits that built his career. And while Hollywood has changed over the decades, with many comedians now avoiding certain subjects altogether, Brooks still believes in the power of pushing boundaries. His career is filled with reminders that comedy, at its most daring, will always have the potential to offend, and that sometimes the very act of offending is what makes the joke worth telling. But the question everyone's been asking is, after all the battles he's fought, where exactly is Mel Brooks today? And what's keeping him busier than most comedians half his age? Where is Mel Brooks today? At 99, Mel Brooks is living proof that comedy can keep a person young. He may not be the non-stop whirlwind he was in the 1970s and 80s, but he's far from fading into the background. His home base these days is Southern California, most likely in the comfort and privacy of Santa Monica. In the public eye, Brooks has shifted from relentless film production to carefully chosen appearances. He's more selective about what he says yes to, often turning down offers that would require the kind of long, exhausting schedules he once embraced without hesitation. That doesn't mean he's inactive, though. Far from it. In recent years, he's lent his unmistakable voice to animated films and shows, reminding audiences that his comedic timing works just as well without him stepping in front of a camera. And when he does appear in person, like at the 2024 Peabody Awards, it's a reminder that his sharp wit hasn't dulled a bit. Despite decades of fame, Brooks has grown more private with age. He doesn't parade himself at Hollywood parties or court media attention, preferring a quieter rhythm that centers on family. His children, including writer Max Brooks, and his grandchildren, are a constant presence in his life. They keep him grounded, bring him joy, and in many ways carry the torch of creativity and curiosity that has always defined him. Part of his comfort in this later chapter of life comes from the simple fact that he's earned it. Brooks is one of only 21 people in the world to have achieved EGOT status, winning an Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, and Tony Award. That's not just a trivia point, it's a rare badge of honor that cements him in the uppermost ranks of entertainment history. Still, the man who once thrived on outrageous, envelope-pushing comedy hasn't lost his conviction in humor's purpose. For Brooks, laughter isn't just entertainment, it's survival. He's said many times over the years that comedy is both a shield and a weapon, a way to protect oneself from the darkness of the world while also cutting through its absurdities. And if anyone knows about facing darkness, it's Mel Brooks, who has outlived friends, collaborators, and even his beloved wife, Anne Bancroft. Yet through it all, he's found ways to transform personal pain into something that can make others smile. Speaking about the idea of retirement, he said, "I can still walk on a stage and talk, so why not? You reach a certain age and you begin to tell the story of your life. That's what I'm doing, and they're paying me for it. And they're paying me in more than just money. They're paying me in waves of love and laughter, and you can't do much better than that." Mel Brooks isn't just a beloved figure from Hollywood's past. He's an active influence on its present and future. Generations of comedians have studied his fearlessness in tackling taboo subjects, and he remains an example of how humor can be used to provoke thought without losing entertainment value. That influence doesn't come from imitation alone. Brooks's body of work has served as a creative blueprint for artists who want to challenge audiences while keeping them laughing. He proved that comedy could be outrageous yet intelligent, silly yet deeply human. His ability to turn tragedy into laughter without trivializing it has given others permission to tell difficult stories in unconventional ways. Brooks also stands as a reminder that creative risk is worth it. Many of his films faced rejection, controversy, or financial risk before finding success, but he never abandoned the instinct to push boundaries. That courage has inspired countless others to trust their own comedic voices, even when the industry says no. For Brooks, comedy has always been more than a career. It's been his way of making sense of life, of connecting with others, and of healing wounds. At nearly a century old, he still embodies that belief. And that may be his greatest gift to the world, the unshakable faith that laughter really can unite us. What's your favorite memory of Mel Brooks? Drop your answers in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.